So this lesson was born out of personal experience. I feel like, God teaches me something. I'm like, well, maybe you guys could use this too. I don't know. But I was having this conversation with God the other day because there's some step relatives that are not thrilled that I'm getting married. I mean, really not thrilled that I'm getting married. And so I just praying the other morning. It's like, well, Lord, am I supposed to not get married to make them happy? And I'm having this conversation with God. And finally he's like, isn't that the definition of people pleasing? I'm like, well, yeah, maybe. And so I was like, well, what is people pleasing? And is this biblical and is it unbiblical? And so we're on a journey. And by the way, he told me that I should continue with my marriage plan. So I'm getting married. But anyway, so we're on a journey of figuring out the difference between loving people, which God definitely calls us to do, and people pleasing. And I've learned it's a very subtle difference. And so we're going to be kind of unpacking that today. So first let's just kind of do a quiz, just to see if all of us are people pleasers, which I have this sneaky suspicion that at some level we all are. So have you ever walked on eggshells around someone?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever said yes to someone's request so they wouldn't get upset with you?
Yeah.
Have you ever done something kind for someone in the hope they would like you or appreciate you? Okay, people are pretending like they never do these things, but we know. Have you ever helped someone with the hope others would see what you're doing and think highly of you? Okay. Have you ever done something for someone and then really resented it and felt like pressured into it and you're just resentful?
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
Have you ever said yes to someone because you didn't want to disappoint them, even though you didn't have the time or the energy or the desire to do what they requested? Yeah. Have you ever apologized for something that wasn't your fault just to head off possible conflict?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Have you ever agreed with someone else's opinion or idea just so they would like you or you would rock the boat?
Oh, yeah.
Do you sometimes act differently around different sets of people so that you fit in and gain their approval?
Yes.
When you sense someone disagrees with you, do you immediately soften your position to gain their approval or avoid uncomfortable conflict? Those are just 10 questions. Is there anyone in the room who said, I can't answer yes to even one of those questions? Anybody? That's what I thought. Welcome to my club, the People Pleasers Club. But we are reformed. We're going to be reformed people pleasers by the end of the lesson, okay? Reformed people pleasers. So, what is people pleasing? Let's start with that. Webster's definition is someone who wants to please people, but often to meet their own emotional needs. So you want to please people, but it's often to meet your own emotional need. And this is where the problem really lies. We know as believers we're supposed to love other people, serve other people, but a people pleaser serves from a different heart motivation than just pure love. A people pleaser is actually trying to meet a deep emotional need of their own instead of trusting God to meet their emotional needs. So what is the underlying deep emotional need we're trying to meet through people pleasing? I was asking God, okay, so what is this deep emotional need that I'm trying to get met through people pleasing, but I'm really supposed to get it met from you? What is it? And so I felt like there were 3 common root motivations for people pleasing. The first would be your own need or desire to be liked or loved by others. That could be a root cause of people pleasing, this desire to be liked or loved. It could be your own desire to gain the approval or admiration of others. You're just seeking that approval or admiration. Or it could be your own need or desire to avoid a possibly angry response or stress from potential conflict. Yeah, I felt like all 3 of those. I know I've had that motivation of my heart many times. But here's the deal. I've learned that people-pleasing is not biblical. It would be actually unbiblical. Galatians 1 verse 10. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? Dun, 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 it's like right there in black and white. Am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Uh-oh. Okay, it's right there in the Bible. 1 Thessalonians 2 also kind of elaborates on this. We are not trying to please people, but God, who tests our hearts. You know we never use flattery, nor did we put on a mask to cover up greed. God is our witness. We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else. And then Proverbs 29:25 is also an interesting verse. It says, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. And sometimes that motivation of avoiding possible conflict, disappointing this person, aggravating this person, is kind of that fear of man thing, and it proves to be a snare. However, that being said, we know if we're Christians and we've read our Bible much that we are supposed to love people and serve people. That's made pretty clear. So let's go over a couple of those verses. John 13:34, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. And what does that look like? 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And Philippians 2 is kind of a convicting verse. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. Wait a minute, this almost sounds like people-pleasing. Doesn't it almost sound like people-pleasing right there? We'll get to the difference between loving and people-pleasing in just a second. But let's finish up with one more that really tells us how we're supposed to interact with other people according to God. That's Colossians 3, starting in verse 12. We've read this verse so many times, we should have it memorized. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. So if we carry out all these love commands, it sounds like we're kind of like working our tails off sometimes and getting exhausted and doing all this stuff to love other people. Doesn't that sound like people-pleasing? Well, loving and serving will sometimes be a sacrifice on our part. It will sometimes be a sacrifice on our part, but the motivation is pure love. That's the difference between people-pleasing and loving, as the Bible says. The motivation is pure love. And this is where Christians and secular psychologists differ when it comes to people-pleasing. I was reading a bunch of the pop psychology stuff about people-pleasing, and they're like, it's really bad if you exhaust yourself, or you're doing all, you're getting tired. Well, I think the apostles were kind of tired sometimes, and they were getting flogged and stuff for trying to witness to people in love. They weren't exactly doing a lot of good self-care, and the pop psychologists will say, well, that's people-pleasing, that's wrong. No, because their motivation was pure love. Do you see the difference between what pop psychologists call people-pleasing and the Bible calls people-pleasing? In God's kingdom, we are indeed sometimes prompted to self-sacrifice for the good of another person. Again, think of the apostles, martyred for their faith. They were so determined to love other people and present them with the gospel that they were willing to suffer tremendous persecution, right? They could have been people pleasers who went along with the crowd and wanted to be liked and avoid discomfort. They could have been people pleasers, but they were not people pleasers. Their motivation was to serve God and love others no matter the cost. But the motivation was, again, pure love. People-pleasing actions and loving actions can look so similar. There's often just a very subtle difference between loving and people-pleasing, and it really all comes down to the motivation of your heart. That's it. It's the motivation of your heart. Are you serving or helping because you want to please God and you're taking direction from Him? Or are you serving and helping because you want people to like you or love you, or you want to avoid disappointing someone or making someone possibly angry? It's really just all about the motivation of the heart. Proverbs 16:2 says, all a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord. He knows why we're doing what we're doing. Like he already knows what the motivation is. And I came across this verse that was kind of interesting. It reminded me that God does not reward people-pleasing or doing righteous deeds just so people will think highly of us. It's Matthew 6:1. It says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. Because sometimes people pleasers are like, look at me. Look at, it's like, when we're fasting, we're not supposed to tell people we're fasting, but, some people are like, well, just drop the subtle hint. Well, I can't have that food today because I'm fasting. because they want to be approved of or thought highly of. Or it's like maybe you feel compelled by God to bring a meal to someone that's, I don't know, a new mom or something like that, but you just have to kind of tell other people about it. But see, then the motivation is people pleasing. I want people to think highly of me, as opposed to just that pure motivation of I just want to be loving and kind. That's my motivation. So what are the common negative impacts of people pleasing? Anyone have any? Just toss out an idea. What is a common negative impact of people pleasing? Exhaustion. Who said that? Because that's like first one that comes to mind. Exhaustion, stress, can cause a lot of stress. Resentment, I think, is a huge one. How many of us have felt resentment when you've been a people pleaser? Come on. It just comes with the territory, right? It could also, here's a negative impact, it can enable another person to stay stuck in a sinful or irresponsible pattern, because sometimes we're walking on eggshells, we don't want to rock the boat, that's a people-pleasing action, and we're not confronting someone or having boundaries if we should. It could mean really neglecting your own health, your legitimate needs. It could be that, and maybe God doesn't intend that for you. It could be, here's one, compromising your own values and what you know is right because you're just trying to get along with everybody else, and if they disagree with you, you kind of morph into what their beliefs are so that you get along and fit in and have their approval. But compromising our values, that doesn't sound very biblical, does it? Probably not.
Stress.
What? That can cause stress. That's right.
Financial.
Oh, financial stress. Yes, yes. Conflict avoidance can also be a huge byproduct of people-pleasing. Conflict avoidance, and what happens when you avoid conflict overly long? It's like a volcano. The lava dome is building and building and building until it explodes, right? Another common negative side effect or impact of people-pleasing is finding your value in what other people think of you, which leads to a lot of pressure and anxiety trying to perform and achieve and do more so people will like you more. So you're trying to always get your value from other people. So how do we break free? How do we break free from people pleasing and get our deep emotional needs met by God? How about that emotional need for love? Because we all have that, that deep longing to be loved and cherished. Well, to me, it just means spending time with God and meditating on the scriptures that reveal His great love for us, and really, really meditating on those scriptures. Some of you know one of my favorite scriptures is Zephaniah 3:17, and I memorized it a long time ago because I sometimes need to remind myself, oh yeah, this is what God says about me. This is how much He loves me. That verse says He takes great delight in you. He will quiet you with His love. He will rejoice over you with singing. That's still mind-boggling to me that God would enthusiastically rejoice over me. I mean, isn't that just kind of crazy when you think about that He's rejoicing over you? He's not going oh, she's okay. He's I'm rejoicing over her. That's kind of amazing, right? When you start meditating on some of those verses. There's another one in Isaiah 62 that I don't have written down. I think it's Isaiah 62. Again, it talks about how He rejoices over you as a bridegroom rejoices over his bride. That's a lot of rejoicing. And this is how He feels about you. When you start meditating on some of those scriptures, it starts to fill up that need you have to feel loved. And now you don't have to be such a people pleaser because you're I'm confident in who I am and my value. What about that emotional need for security? Because women, I don't know, every woman I've ever bumped into pretty much craves security. Relational security, financial security, just security. Anybody? Security? Yeah. No one?
No.
Okay, that's what I thought. Everyone's I don't know. Security. We all have that deep emotional need for security. Again, I might sound like a broken record probably because I am, but we got to be digging into the Word. What is He telling us about finding that security in Him, right? Deuteronomy 31:6 is maybe a verse you should memorize. It says, be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, your enemies or other people. For it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Don't you love that? That you're not alone. That He's with you the whole time. That He will never leave your side. despite what's going on with people in your life, even if you don't do what they ask you to do and they get kind of angry with you, it doesn't really matter. He says, like, don't be in dread of them. I'm with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Meditating on that scripture might be helpful for you. What about the emotional need for peace? Because we all just want peace, right? Just that elusive thing called peace. Again, spend time meditating on those scriptures that reveal that He will give you peace. My go-to favorite is Isaiah 26:3. You will keep him in perfect peace. That would be perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. That is a verse worth memorizing. I mean, if you're going to memorize verse, isn't that just like the best verse? Because I've whipped this verse out so many times in recent weeks, and it's like my shoulders just kind of drop. I'm able to take a deep breath. I'm able to calm down. The anxiety kind of slips away. It's like, oh, that's right. I keep my mind stayed on God, glued to the Lord. My eyes are locked on Jesus, and that perfect peace comes, right? Perfect peace. So the bottom line is this. Here's the bottom line. We are to consult God. We are to consult God and ask Him how He wants us to serve Him, how He wants us to serve others, how He wants us to love others well, instead of striving to be liked by others or avoid conflict. It really comes down to asking Him. Like in every moment. When the person asks you, hey, can you go ahead and, I don't know, whatever someone might, can you be the Sunday school teacher? Because we don't have a Sunday school teacher for our 4th grade class, and so we need you to do it. And you feel like, well, I guess I better say yes because, I want them to like me, or I don't want to make them angry, or, whatever people-pleasing motive, right? And instead of saying yes, what if you were to say, I'll pray about that? That's a pretty good answer. Instead of just agreeing, you say, I'm going to pray about that, and I'll get back to you. And then guess what you do? You actually go pray about it. And you actually ask God, is this something you want me to do? And it might even be exhausting to you. And it might not be something that you want to do in that moment. But if God's asking you to do it, then do it. If you're doing it because, I don't want them to be disappointed or angry with me, I want them to think highly of me or whatever, I don't want to face possible conflict, if that's the heart motivation, that's called people-pleasing, and it's not biblical. So ask God, what do you want me to do? Romans 12, verse 2, starting in verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Every request that's made of us, we bring it to God. Because He's the ultimate person we're working for. Is this something you want me to do, God? Yes or no? Truthfully, some of you know my story about getting invited to speak in Africa. Worst thing I could ever think of doing. Some of you would be like, oh, I'd love to go to Africa. Not me. It was like, please, Lord, don't ever make me go to a foreign country, especially like a third world country. Like, that's not my thing. I'm scared to death. I don't want to go. And so, of course, I get an invitation to go to Africa. And, I did not want to do it. I did not want to do it. But I actually ended up consulting God after a while. Like, okay, what do you think? And He said, do it. And it's like, okay, this was not fun for me. Sarah was there. She made it more fun. But it was not my thing. But I worked for this master. It wasn't about me. It was about like, Lord, what are you saying to do? And God might ask you to do something that's a little outside your comfort zone or exhausting or tiresome or whatever. But if He's asking you, we say yes. We say yes because He's our master. Psalm 25:9. He leads the humble in what is right and teaches the humble His way. He will guide you when you ask the question, Lord, do you want me to say yes to this request? Lord, do you want me to say no to this request? Like, Lord, what are you saying I should do in this moment? James 1:5-6. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. So, moving forward, this is the question we should continually ask ourselves as we interact with people. And the question is very simple. Lord, what are you calling me to do in this interaction? What are you calling me to do in this interaction? That should be our bottom line question during every human interaction. It could be that you've got do any of you have like a domineering person in your life? Like kind of like a strong personality? Some of you do. I bet you all of you have someone. It could be a boss, it could be anyone. Often we just tend to kind of kowtow like, well, whatever, I just don't want to rock the boat. But what if you were to start asking this question? Lord, I mean, not out loud in front of them. but like quietly in your brain, in your heart, you're talking to God like, Lord, what do you want me to do in this interaction? And it might be surprising what you hear, because sometimes he might go like, well, do this. And you're like, didn't see that coming. That I'm supposed to help this person. I thought I was supposed to say, no, I'm not going to help you with that. But maybe God knows something that you don't, and he's saying, yeah, help them, agree in this situation. Or maybe he's saying, no, don't do it, don't do it. I mean, you've got to ask the question, right, in every single interaction with every human being, like, Lord, what do you want me to do in this interaction? And then the heart motivation becomes serving the Lord and loving others instead of people pleasing.